Hello, Simone. I am excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be going over a lot of fertility statistics, a lot of graphs, and we are going to be asking a question that has been posed in a few different ways. We're going to be looking at a
Mm.
number of different articles and research pieces today. One is the question of, is fertility collapse primarily due to a breakup in marriage rates downstream of cell phone use?
What?
Or is, and then a second argument I heard, actually very interesting for me. What is it? Adam ruins everything. That guy, Adam Conover, he has like a
Yeah.
podcast now, and he had a
Yes.
competent, progressive pronatalist on who is arguing that it was cell phones that were leading to all of this. Um,
This is not something I've heard before. I mean, certainly cell phones have been blamed for the lack of children's literacy, the mental health crisis, but marriage rates?
well, no, she argued it was making kids that wasn't happening because of phones. So we're going to go over these two related arguments, okay?
Okay, sure.
And I'm going to start by reading a piece from the Financial Times and then going occasionally into other pieces that it's citing. But from a marked fall in the number of couples, had US rates of marriage and cohabitation remained constant over the past decade, America's total fertility rate would be higher today than it was then. And here I am putting a graph on screen that is total fertility rate varied widely by marital status. And what it looks at is what your total fertility rate would be if you had been having kids this whole time. So it makes
Hmm.
some numbers look really high. Like the married and spouse present looks like it's been hovering around 4.5 for the past decade, right? And so the question is, okay, why does that look like it's hovering around 4.5? Why does separated look like it's hovering around 2.5? Why does married spouse absent look like it's hovering around 3? Like these seem weirdly high, right? Okay, so here's why. While women are married, they tend to have very high birth rates. Note the chart above does not show that married women will have 4 or 5 kids. It means that the average birth rate for married women ages 15 to 50 sums up to 4 or 5 kids. You started at 15 there. That seems a little like you're massaging the data. Okay. I
Tiny
don't think
bit.
many women are getting married at 15, sweetheart.
Tiny, tiny bit.
Um, but that's a 35-year span when the average woman will actually only spend 12 and 20 of those years married.
Yeah.
So, okay, what is shown here, which I find compelling, is that for period married, the number of kids people are having is not declining over time.
Hmm.
So if you can get people married earlier, you are going to have more kids.
Yeah.
Yet we've said that before. I do not think that that is the core of the problem, but we'll talk about that in just a second.
Hmm.
As you can see above, there's been a decline in married fertility since the peak in 2009, but married fertility rates today aren't actually much lower than married fertility rates in the mid 2000s. For divorcees and widowers, age adjusted birth rates are actually higher now than they were before the recession. Never married women, again, have about pre recession levels of fertility, too. By fixing age specific marital status, 2001 to 2008 levels, we can model a counterfactual scenario of what fertility might have been had people gotten married and formed families at the same rate as formerly. And what you see here is that, yes, the fertility rate would have fallen net negative, but not by a ton. You're looking at like by negative, like 0.2 here or something like that. Okay, but we'll get to why I'm not super compelled by this. Essentially, all of the decline in fertility since 2001 can be explained by changes in the marital composition of the population. Married, single, and divorced women are all about as likely controlling for the age and marital status to have kids as they were in 2001. But today, a smaller portion of women are married during those peak fertility years. Relationships are not just becoming less common, but increasingly fragile. In egalitarian Finland, it is now more common for couples who move in together to split up than to have a child, a sharp reversal in the historic trend. And this is from a paper here, Partnership Dynamics and Entry into Parenthood Comparison of Finnish Birth Cohorts, 1969 to 2000. Any thoughts before I go further?
No, keep going. I want to hear more.
When pictured as a rise in happily childless dinks, dual income, no kid couples with plenty of disposable income, the social trends accompanying falling birth rates seem benign. But the rise of singledom and relationship dissolution is a less rosy story, especially
Mhm.
considering the drop in relationship formation is steepest among the poorest. Of course, many people are happily single. The freedom to choose how to spend one's life and with who or without is to be celebrated. I don't believe that, by the way. People aren't happily single. Everyone hates their life when they're single. I
I
did.
don't know. I loved being single, but I didn't know you existed, so there's
How,
that.
okay. Quality of your life when you were single versus quality today.
Much better now. More stressful though.
Yeah, but the point being is you would hate your life when contrasted with today if you knew this was a possibility.
Yeah, totally.
But the wider data on loneliness and dating frustration suggests not as all as well. So we're going to put some graphs on screen here. Here you can see the share of children born outside of wedlock by mother's class, and this is in the United States. 64% if you're poor, 36% of your working class, 13% of your middle or upper class. Millennial family pass by class. Do you have a kid before marriage or do you have marriage before a kid? If you're poor, 61% chance you have a kid before marriage, only 16% chance you have a marriage before a kid.
Wow.
If you're
Okay.
working class, it's 44% chance you have a kid before marriage, 34% chance you have a marriage before a kid. Kids are forcing marriages in our society. If you're middle or upper class, it's actually only a 19% chance you have a kid before marriage and a 51% chance you have a marriage before a kid.
Hmm.
Wild, right? And when you look at
Yeah.
these class disparities. Why an almost worldwide decline and why now? The fact is that this is happening almost everywhere all at once, points to more broad changes acting across borders than country specific factors. The
Hmm.
proliferation of smartphones and social media has been one such exogenous shock.
True.
Geographic differences in the rise of singledom broadly track mobile internet usage, particularly among women, whose calculus in weighing up potential partners is changing.
Mm.
Both of those things are true, but maybe not as strong as you'd think. Surveys of childless women tell us that the top reason is not career, lifestyle, or financially related. It is that they just haven't found the right partner. This was the second most common reason given in a representative UK study of 42-year-old childless women, right behind not wanting children. Focus on career was way down the list. US studies echo this. Fertility rates within marriages have stayed fairly steady since 1990. And I'll put a graph on screen here, or a chart on screen here. The most important reason for remaining childless. This was a 1970 British cohort study, so a very old cohort study, first of all.
Yeah.
And if you look at men versus women, actually, for men trying to find a good partner, it was the harder problem than it was for women. This was 28% of men not wanting children, 23% of men not finding the right person. For women, it was 31% not wanting children, 19% not finding the right person. So women are the
Hmm.
bottleneck in not wanting children, not finding the right person. This is a little bit of pocket sand here, okay? Mobile phones and attitudes towards women's participation in politics, evidence from Africa. So, in this study, they are showing that women adopt more liberal views of a woman's role in a relationship and with kids when they get access to mobile phones. And this is where I will bring up the secondary argument I heard that I found pretty compelling
Uh-huh.
from that Adam Conover show, which is to say, okay, well, so and I actually think this argument is way stronger than this argument in the Financial Times, because the Financial Times is like, well, it's women becoming more liberal and not getting married, but the problem is that we know in societies where women are still getting married, which we'll get to in a bit, whether it's Iran or India or anything like that, we're still seeing precipitously dropping fertility rates.
Right.
So it's not marriage. It's just not. It's just not. We don't. We should see a huge difference in the societies where marriage is still happening and where it's not still happening, and we don't see that huge difference. So
Mhm.
whatever it is everywhere. It's in rural Guatemala, it's in Iran, it's in India, it's in China, it's in the US. What is everywhere? Mobile phones. So what this other person argued, she goes, well, what you don't understand is how much boredom people used to have. She's like, when I was growing up, yeah, we had phones and I had like Snake on that phone. I had Snake on my phone. I'm a very good
I
gamer.
remember fondly. Yes.
Yes. And when you're deciding, do I want to go over to a friend's house or play Snake? You usually want to go over to a friend's house, even if they don't have like something specific planned. You're like, almost anything is better than Snake. Snake is only better than like sitting alone in a car or something like that, right?
Mhm.
Now you're dealing with a completely different phenomenon. Do I want to go to a friend's house or enter like a fully immersive 3D world, right? Or do I want to chat with an AI? Or do I want to that's lot harder, especially and within cell phones, you've got these whole keep in mind, you didn't have things like Reddit back then. You didn't have things like social media as we understand it today, where there is constant feedback, constant dopamine loops. And the idea being that the main reason people had kids historically was just that they were bored. That's the main reason they dated. That's the main reason they hung out with friends. That's the main reason they did all of the things that made society work.
Yeah, because
Is
what we're also seeing is rates of like the number of friends that people have are much lower now than they were before as well. And that does correlate with smartphone adoption. So
Yeah.
there's ancillary evidence that suggests this is true. People are just not, they don't need other humans to amuse them anymore.
And in some countries, they're like banning cell phones in schools and stuff like that, which with a lot of this, it's like, I'm sorry, that's not going to work, because then they're going to have access to cell phones outside of school. Do you
Yeah.
plan on them finding their partner in high school? Like, you don't seem to. So why are you acting like that's the solution, right?
Yeah.
So one, even if this is the problem, I'm not particularly compelled by it. And then two, this doesn't explain the secondary issue, which for me is much bigger, which is that fertility rates are going up for every single age cohort except for under 24.
Yeah.
Or going up or staying around steady. It's under 24 that is dropped, and then under 20 where you've had the precipitous drop. And so what we need to find is ways to motivate fertility at these higher ages more than you had historically, dramatically more than you had historically. And so you can't explain new technology, which you might say is actually the drop in fertility rates is a good thing, and we need to increase fertility rates in older generations through increasing the desire. Like, you need to have a desire to have lots of kids than even your ancestors did. And also, none of this really, to me, like the boredom thing, that doesn't explain 50% of people saying they don't want kids. If you're talking about like Gen Z, that doesn't explain that, when historically, as we went over in a recent episode, only 5% of people said that. So, and 20% had no kids historically, by the way. That was what we learned in that episode.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily boredom or if it's also that we've lost an ability to be comfortable dealing with humans at all because of phones. People are far less comfortable now interacting in person, let alone picking up a phone to make a call. That's like seen as kind of like a ballsy move, I think it's ballsy when dares to give me a call. And that, I think, adds the friction significantly to bringing another human into the world and being aware of the
Well, I
fact
agree. I think what we need is new exogenous ideological motivators for having kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And not modifying or banning technology that we cannot control in terms of how our kids are interacting with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when I say they're like, well, I can control when they're young. Yeah, but then you can't control when they're not young. And now you've given them this horrible thing they have no immunity to.
Yeah. That's a really important thing, is this idea of raising kids screen free. I get so an argument I hear a lot of people make is, well, at least I can give my kid inhibitory control and the ability to live without screens as long as they're in my household. And I do see benefits in that. Absolutely. It's great.
You're
But
not giving them inhibitory control if you are removing the screens. You have done the exact opposite.
yeah, I mean, the thing is, you have to learn how to have that control despite the presence of the screens, unless you plan on isolating your kid for life, because otherwise they will get access. And
Which the Amish do, and some Haredi communities do, functionally speaking. But
yeah, it's
if
an
you're not in
option.
one of those groups, I guess convert, if that's the way you want to play the game. I think I want kids who can engage with technology, because I think that technology is going to be key to them crushing their enemies. And so I'm not keeping them away from this stuff, But to continue, the fall in coupling is deepest in extremely online Europe, East Asia, and Latin America, followed by the Middle East and then Africa. Singledom remains rare in South Asia, where women's web access is more limited. This is really interesting to me, because I didn't know that web access for women was so limited in South Asia. And it
really
is true that the places where you've seen the biggest fertility crashes have been like East Asia, where phone use is so much more common than it is in Europe or the United States.
Yeah.
And then in Latin America, phone use is also super, super common in terms of like recreation and stuff like that. And it's less common in Africa, from what I've heard. So 6 in 10 women internet users who took part in a study face some kind of restriction from their families when using the internet. This is in Pakistan. Women Disconnected, Feminist Case Studies on Gender Digital Divide Amidst COVID-19. This is a paper. The majority of respondents of the survey said that they are only allowed to use the internet for attending online classes or talking to family via WhatsApp.
Wow.
More than a third of those surveyed acknowledged higher restrictions on the use of internet for girls than boys, with 16% saying girls are not allowed to use it at all. 16% said girls are not allowed to use it at all.
Gosh.
Key
But
findings.
boys are fine.
Yeah.
Why
Key
the
findings.
difference?
Well, because they're not incepted with the feminist mind virus, which is the key thing that's causing a lot of the changes in the way women view, one, the right to not have kids, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, having phones is damaging for everyone. You know, the effects are
No, it's
universal.
not. Not in the same way. The ideological spread to a guy, like you're not gonna F up a guy's image of his attractiveness with a phone. You're not gonna F up a guy's image of his market value in dating markets with a phone.
I don't know. I mean, the
You're-
existence of looks maxing implies to me that that's not true.
Looks maxing is a minute community when you contrast it with the women who think that their value on the marriage marketplace is their value on the sexual marketplace. It's like not even, this is the majority of women versus 0.01% of guys.
I don't know.
No. What do you mean you don't know? Do you argue that the number of looks maxers is higher than 0.01%
Well,
of the
also
US
women
population?
though are far more likely to end up obsessing about their appearance because that tends to be a major factor influencing their desirability.
Okay, so you're saying that it is way more damaging to women than men.
Well, yeah, but I'm also not so sure that
No,
removing
what
internet
percent of men,
access is gonna fix all
realistically,
that.
no. You back up your position here. What
But
percent
also,
of
I mean,
men,
what you still, I'm not just talking about the development of body dysmorphia. I mean, you're also screwing up inhibitory control. You're also distracting people. Like, why?
that doesn't matter. I don't think that matters at all to having kids.
So are you saying it's a culture? I mean, but also look at the cultural ideals that are presented to young men online. They're basically, you know, forced infantilization for most of their lives. Men are encouraged to live like teenagers for as long as they possibly can. There's very little
I
celebration of
don't think that
parenthood in
I
early
don't think that
marriage.
that's true. I think that there are some online communities for men that do push that, but the number of men that gravitate towards them is the vast minority. I think that this is the difference here. You are talking about the vast majority of women versus the vast minority of men. If you look at the women who end up making inaccurate judgments about their value on marriage markets due to interacting with online dating pools, I would say the number is probably 95% to 80% of women. If you look at the number of men who develop an obsession with their looks versus the number of women who develop an obsession with their looks based on online women, I'd say over 50% of women. Men, I'd say less than 3% of men. You're just not talking about the same numbers.
So
If
you're
you
just
talk
trying to blame body dysmorphia on why women aren't having kids if
No,
they're
I'm saying it's
exposed to
one of the
phones?
things. I'm saying, for example, red pillism, for example, is
Mm.
much less damaging to having lots of kids than feminism is. A guy who enters even an inaccurate representation of a historic male-female relationship as depicted by the red pill community is likely to have kids.
It's my
Women
intuition that the bigger problem is the normalization of a culture that puts hedonism over all else and doesn't reward having families or living in alignment with values that aren't just hedonistic or highly progressive values. And I think that that affects men just as much as women.
I disagree really strongly here.
Hmm.
It doesn't. I mean, like, it obviously does. I'm trying to walk you through this. So I'm trying to get you to, like, think of numbers in your head, okay? What percent of men who engage with the internet do you think are engaged with, like, toxic, like, red pill communities?
Probably not that many, but I'm not sure. Like I have no
No,
I
but
have
that's the
no
point. You
research on this.
know the number is maybe between 5 to 25%. Low, okay? However, you also know how many women who engage with the internet engage with toxic progressive communities. You can just look at the data. It's 70, 60%. It's not even close.
Yeah, I think well, and it's not to run counter to my own argument, but the fact that spoonies are almost entirely comprised of young women. This is to say
What
people who believe that they've chronic illnesses, and sometimes really do, but often don't. And that can be really damaging to their lives.
And what about
And
Stoics, right? How many female Stoics have you heard of in online communities?
yeah, fair. I mean, that is true. So
The internet is more damaging to women than it is to men. Anyway,
I've
to
not
continue.
heard this thesis before, but I'm gonna have to think about it, Malcolm. I'm gonna have to think about it.
All right. So, key findings from the research indicate that around 40% of the women surveyed use the internet every day. So, a lot of them are still using it every day, and even in these countries, with usage becoming higher as family income rises. So, again, family income, this probably shows why you have the negative correlation here. A whopping 80% of the respondents who are unable to use the internet are from South Waziristan, one of the newly merged districts of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa something province. Anyway, what sort of birth rate does this lead to? Well, Pakistan's birth rate is falling. As recently as the 1990s, it was over 6 per woman, and now it's 3.41, but it's still quite high when compared with something like India, which is below replacement rate now, or Bangladesh, which
Fair.
is below replacement rate. This is not to overstate the role of social media. Other cultural differences between countries and regions mediate both the spread of liberal ideas and people's ability to act on them. Caste and honor systems encourage high rates of marriage irrespective of media access, and female education, income, and employment differ markedly between regions. So remember, we're talking about India has an unusually low fertility rate for its income level. So let's look at India in marriage rates, okay? In a 2018 survey of more than 160,000 households, 93% of married Indians said that they came from an arranged marriage. Just 3% had a love marriage, and another 2% described theirs as a love cum arranged marriage, which usually indicates that the relationship was set up by the families and then the couple agreed to get married. There has been only a slight change over time. 94% of octogenarians had an arranged marriage, and the figure remains at over 90% for young couples in their 20s. Did you know that? That's really interesting to me.
That is really interesting.
Manisha Mondal always thought that she would have a love marriage. I was used to fighting with my parents. I fought to attend college that was a little far away from home. I thought, okay, love marriage will be the next thing to fight about. Manisha, an office assistant in Bahali, a small town in eastern India, told me. But in the first few days of college, a few boys approached her to talk, and older female students took her to the bathroom for a talking to. If she spoke to the boys, they warned, her reputation would be ruined.
Oh,
To keep an eye out for her, her older brother would drive past college a few times a day to make sure she was not talking to boys. College was important to Manisha, and
this
she'd
sounds
rather
incredibly
continue to
oppressive.
study and then work than take a chance on love. So she cared more about work than she cared about marrying who she wanted to, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah,
It
that
does
is
sound
interesting.
oppressive, but it appears to be working. By her last year in college, her wedding had been fixed with the son of her father's friend from the same community. I see my parents. They have never had a fight, so I think it will work for me too, the 24-year-old said, showing her crossed fingers over the WhatsApp call. Marrying within your caste remains an essential feature of marriage in India. In 2014, a survey of more than 70,000 people, fewer than 10% of urban Indians, said anyone in their family had married outside their caste, and not many more outside their Jahiti or subcaste. Interfaith marriages were even rarer. Just 5% of urban respondents said that anyone in their family had married outside their religion.
Oh, wow.
Did you know about that in India?
I didn't. But India and Pakistan aren't famous for great quality of life for women. So I just don't know how I feel about this. Like the solution to me is not let's just roll back human rights. Let's just roll back education. Let's just
Can we
roll
roll
back.
back human rights a smidge?
I don't accept it. I don't. And I think that carrots are more motivating in the end than sticks. I think that empowerment is better than disempowerment. And I think that there's plenty of history in the world in which women have had a lot of freedom, but have used it well because they weren't exposed to a terrible culture. And I agree that smartphones are a vector for very unsustainable and dangerous cultures. And I agree that those cultures have also hurt me, but they also hurt me as a teen well before smartphones existed. I don't think just taking them away
You look at what motivates
Existence.
fertility in our family: conviction, ideology, religion. None of it would be at all mitigated by cell phone or internet exposure.
Yeah. Also, you would not have gotten kids out of me if you were like, well, I only want to marry a stay-at-home wife who doesn't go on the internet.
I would not have gotten kids out of you, squeezing you for
Well,
all the
like
kids.
your whole your selling point to me was you don't have to give anything up if you don't want to. You can keep your
But you
career
see, that's
if
an
that's what matters
unrealistic
to you.
selling point for most people.
I do see that that's an unrealistic selling point for most people, but
Also, I'd point out here that you make it sound like totally magnanimous towards me, but the actual term of the contract we came up with is not as unfair as it may sound. The rule is that you would always be allowed to pursue your career,
mhm,
and if it came to it, I would become a stay-at-home dad.
yeah,
Not that I would always support you no matter what. The rule was you were going to support us no matter what.
yeah.
I just gave you the privilege of supporting the family.
The optionality, giving women optionality, I think gives them empowerment. And I think most of the choices among women to so optionality plays a role in choosing to not have kids because one of the biggest things we're seeing is just fewer unplanned teen births. Like that's what we're seeing in South America. It's not that people's intentions have changed. It's just that there are fewer mistake pregnancies
Yeah,
and
so
people are
we'll have,
delaying fertility.
but I think that the core answer to all of this is mistake babies is where the kids have disappeared.
Yeah, like largely that is what has happened. And what you're talking about here is not mistake babies, but you're talking about basically forced babies by disempowering women and creating unwanted babies, which again, like I don't think that forcing people into anything is the solution and I'm vehemently against it.
Well, it doesn't
I
seem
but I
to
think
work because there are countries that do this. Like Iran does this, and it doesn't lead to an increase in fertility rate.
how does Iran force people to have kids?
Women in Iran do not have a lot of rights, and the marriage rate is really high, and it doesn't lead to a high fertility rate. So the question is why? Why? And the answer is because you can't. It doesn't work like this. You can't just do that, especially if they have access to the internet and stuff like that. And so I think that it is a you might be able to get around it if you're in a culture where widespread access to the internet isn't as common. But I don't think that those cultures will end up being the cultures that end up dominating the human species going forwards. So I'm not particularly concerned about them or interested in emulating them myself. So the question is, can you build up the spiritual fortitude to interact with these types of technology? And I think that's doable while still motivating like way higher kid rates than people had historically. And I think that that needs new cultural systems, new way of relating to what kids mean to your culture.
A lot of the reasons why people don't have kids are based on false premises. You know, the idea that you should have your career and everything 100% in place before you have kids, which now is increasingly impossible. Who's ever going to be financially or career stable going forward in an age
Yeah,
of AI?
you can't wait to have kids until you're stable.
Yeah,
You
there's
just
a bunch
can't.
of false, and also this false perception that it's not a good idea to have a kid while you're going through college or graduate school. That's one of the best times to have a kid.
Yeah, I was talking to one of our followers about this, and they were like, "Well, my partner's autistic, and so we need like a full-time nanny to have kids and or
Mm-mm.
start having kids." And I'm like, "No, you don't. It doesn't. My partner's autistic. Okay, like you'll figure it
Yeah,
out
it is more stressful to have a full-time nanny if you're autistic because guess what? Now your life is entirely about
way
managing this
more."
third party,
Yes.
which by the way is incentivized to exploit you, to disappoint you, to only think about themselves and not about you or the baby. So, good luck with that. Being an autistic parent I think is a lot easier if you're good at masking because you will do what doesn't feel natural but is best for your baby when a neurotypical parent would not. I act cheerful and playful around our kids as much as I can. And certainly I don't feel it a lot of the time, but I do
I
it
I
because
go
I'm not.
downstairs and just so you understand it, she creates the perfect environment for my kids. She goes I go downstairs and she is making a homemade pizza and playing Italian music, like fun, like whatever music. The kids are all helping. It is this perfect scenic family moment. And I'm like, Simone, like, how are you this perfect? And she goes, well, I thought this is what like a perfect family moment would look like. So I decided to do this because like I don't know, like I'm autistic, right? So I figured this is what you need to do, right?
Yeah. So
And
normal neurotypical parents do what they feel like doing and react to their children the way that they feel. And a good masking autistic parent reacts the way a perfect, loving, playful, yes and parent will. And so I would argue that, and I would say also many women who are autistic are also really, really good at masking. So they're among the very best parents you could possibly have. No, you don't need a nanny, because like that is the one thing that autistic people really aren't that great at even being able to deal with training, which is just other people being assholes and taking advantage of them, which is a constant theme, right? Like with all of our old like childcare options before we found our amazing solution we have now, you were basically like, Simone, you can't talk to them. Because I would talk to them and suddenly like all of the terms would be subverted. Suddenly they would drop out on us. Suddenly like their rates would triple. And
they sense weakness whenever they talk to Simone. Simone
they
is
can
not
smell
good
fear.
at dealing with contractors.
Yeah. It's not good.
And because she's like, I don't want to be mean. And I'm like, you need to be mean. Like you need to show that you have boundaries.
Yeah.
And you don't. You enter like
like they'll call me trying to work. And this again, this isn't with our current childcare arrangement, which is amazing. But like babysitters would call me and be like, oh, so-and-so is a dirty diaper. And I'd be like, oh, well, of course I'll come down and change it. And then, you know, of course I'm like super interrupted. It's if you give a mouse a cookie situation where like, then I'm down for an hour. And here I am paying this person an hourly rate.
And they demand that you talk to them and they, you know, and you're like, oh, I'm talking to them because it makes them like us more. And I'm like, no, they think that by talking to you, they are getting you to like them more so they can get more out of you. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, anyway. But yeah, that among other things likes it in this like list of things that people misunderstand about parenthood. And just changing the culture around it can make a huge difference. And it's going to have to happen on a community by community basis. But in the end, it's those high fertility communities that are going to inherit the earth. So it doesn't matter that only a small number of cultures are going to pass through all this. The ones that figure it out will. And I just don't think the ones that systematically disempower women are going to make it. These women,
but there'll be like a permanent dysgenic spiral.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. Also, they're not having that many kids anymore.
Yeah, it's not even that effective a strategy anymore. So it's like, why take all the costs?
Yeah, like going forward, one, I mean, because child mortality is way down, women don't ultimately have to have that many kids to really grow the population because we're not losing half of them to tragic ends prematurely. However,
sacrifices
between fertility issues and delayed childbearing, people are going to have to be highly motivated if they want to have kids. They are going to have to really try and either invest in a ton of like just holistic health solutions and live healthy lives, which is hard to do these days, or undergo fertility treatment and IVF to have the number of kids they want to have. And that's a culture thing. That's not a female disempowerment thing. But I do agree, and we're going to have to talk about this with our own family, that, yeah, maybe you're right that phones are hurting women, young women especially, more than they hurt men, which is...
Well, I think that you protect them not by not having them access phones, but by having strong mimetic structures that can protect them from the types of memes. It's the memes on the phones that are hurting them.
Yeah, it's not the phones. 100%. Yeah, the phones are amazing technology. The phones are amazing. The way that we use our phones with kids, I would never not want our kids to be around phones because our kids know.
I'm not that worried about our daughters.
Like last night, Octavian was like, oh, how do you make a paper boat? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's look it up. And then you can learn. That's so cool. I mean, my mom used to look things up in dictionaries with me, and I loved that she did that. But now we can do that with literally learning how to do almost anything. You know, how to deliver a baby calf, how to assemble like all sorts of things. This is so cool.
Well, I love you to death, Simone. Any final thoughts?
I guess not. Sorry.
So it's the accident babies. That's the problem. We need not more accident babies, but we need to find a way to offset the accident babies that don't exist anymore. And the cultures that relied on accident babies to replace themselves, like Catholics. I'm going to say, like, but we
need to make childbearing an aesthetic desirable thing. We need to make childbearing aspirational. We need to make it people's special interests. This has to
Yeah,
be how people are competing,
absolutely.
what people aspire to, what people enjoy, what their hobbies are.
And
And
when I
that's
speak at conventions and people come to me and like at the prenatalist convention last year, somebody's like, well, I mean, surely you want to ban condoms, surely you want to ban porn. And I'm like, no, those are the babies we're glad don't exist. The babies that somebody had because they couldn't figure out how to use a condom or they couldn't get access to a condom, or the babies who exist because a guy didn't have access to porn and so was like, well, I want to get off today, so I guess I'm going to use my girlfriend. Those are the babies that are the accident babies, right?
yeah, how can you be pronatalist? And even if it's just pronatalist in terms of like, oh, I love kids, how can you love kids and want people who resent kids to be raising them? Now, we need to change our culture and show people that actually they are
They're
ready to
ready
have kids.
earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is a very different thing than literally forcing it upon people. Because face it, many people just never do get ready. And
It
then
is
they grow up
interesting
resenting
to
it.
me that so many religions rely on our basic, most perverted, most animalistic biology to motivate reproduction,
Mm.
and that those groups are the ones that are dealing with fertility collapse the most. Because it turns out that this system just doesn't work in the modern era, and that you need to find ways to get people to value kids for the sake of the kids, which does work. You know, for example, if you look at the Catholic communities, for example, they're doing really well in terms of fertility. It's because they want to have kids. It's not because they accidentally got pregnant or didn't understand contraception, or they, it's because they're like, I am all about having like as many kids as possible.
Yeah, and I think, well, the thing is, and what I think Catherine Pakaluk has it right, that high fertility couples start out wanting a lot of kids for aesthetic and ideological reasons. And that gets them through the first three. It's like loosening the jar, because it is really hard to push through your first kids. It is difficult when you're
Yeah.
doing everything for the first time and they're not there to entertain each other and you haven't yet shifted to commercial operations of everything. So nothing's really sustainable. That's the hardest part. So you need that exogenous motivator. And then beyond that, the kids sell themselves. Like it's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard to quit after that point, as long as you have the physical
Are
ability.
you addicted to pregnancy?
I'm not addicted to pregnancy, but I am definitely addicted to having more kids and wanting more kids in this world. They're such amazing people and they love each
A
other.
crippling child addiction. No, I actually find it very interesting that progressives, they always frame what we're doing as like a breeding fetish. They're like,
Yeah, well, which one is ironic because none of our children have been produced via sex.
Right, but the idea of like, oh, they're trying to force their breeding fetish on society, and it's like, what a perverse understanding of why people do things, right?
Yeah. Like literally the only version of sex that is not an exercise of some kind of kink is procreative sex.
Yes.
Everything else is some kind of kink or like hedonic thing. The only version of sex that is like,
well, that's
actually
what it evolved for, right? Like that's why you feel these things.
Yeah. Duh. But
Anyway, love you to death, Simone. Have a good day.
I love you too.
What are we doing for dinner?
Gochujang chicken.
I was actually wondering if you could do fiery chicken with gochujang, but not the sweet sauce.
I don't know what you're talking about. Like the same chicken you had last night? That kind of chicken?
The chicken I had last night used gochujang and a sweet sauce.
It didn't. No.
It was just gochujang and what?
No, there was no gochujang sauce in that chicken at all. That was not gochujang chicken.
What was
you
that?
liked that was Szechuan chicken.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
It was very sweet for what I thought.
When I gave you gochujang chicken, I was like, wow, like, don't you think it's too sweet? And you're like, it's not sweet at all.
I'd be lighter. It's just right now I'm not really in the mood for sweet food. I'm more
Would
in the
you
mood
just like mapo tofu instead? I need to use that chicken.
Yes, let's do mapo tofu.
Off I go then. I love you.
You're amazing.
Everybody has been dunking on phones again. Like we're back to it. I thought that with the threatened TikTok ban that people would start defending phone use, and now no, suddenly phones are still bad.
I haven't noticed this.
I have noticed it offline, not necessarily online. Let me do the reminders. Hey, guess what? We are going to be in Austin at the Natal Conference this March. We would love to see you there. So whether or not you live in Austin, this might be a great excuse to take a little trip. You can get 10% off your registration for NatalCon. This is the second inaugural pro-natalist conference by entering the code Collins at checkout. So if you are going, we're really excited to see you there. And if you're not, sorry.
What does it look like when you eat, Toasty?
Look good, small pieces. And I have weed. Num 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 num.
Does it look crazy when you eat, Toasty?